The testimony that convicted Adolf Eichmann of Holocaust atrocities more than half a century ago has lost none of its power to chill the heart. Jim Axelrod now on a silent artifact from the trial.
Imagine the architect of one of history's greatest atrocities, a man responsible for the deaths of 6 million people living quietly in the shadows. For years, Adolf Eichmann, the mastermind behind the Holocaust, escaped justice, until one fateful night in Buenos Aires. Mossad agents, determined and relentless, tracked him down, leading to a shocking abduction that would shake the world. Eichmann's capture was not just the end of a manhunt.
161, 135. זה היה השם שלי מנובמבר 43 עד 17 בינואר 1945. לא היו לנו שמות אחרים, זה היה השם.
It was a fight for justice that would send shockwaves across the globe. It is late evening in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The city is quiet, but there is tension in the air. A storm is forming in the distance, and on the side of a dimly lit road, two cars are parked about 30 meters apart. Inside these cars, 7 men sit in silence. They are agents of the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, and they have been preparing for this exact night for years. Their eyes are fixed on a bus stop across the road. A bus is due any minute. The man they are waiting for has been living under a false name for over a decade, and if he appears, it will be one of the most important moments in post-war history. The bus arrives, but no one of interest gets off. The men grow tense, wondering if their long planning has been wasted. They wait, pretending to work under the hood of a car, until another bus pulls in. This time, a man steps off. A man who once shaped the fate of millions in Europe. His name is Adolf Eichmann. To understand why these men have been sent across the world to capture him, we need to step back almost 20 years, to a different setting entirely. In January 1942, in a villa just outside Berlin, 15 senior Nazi officials gathered for what became known as the Wannsee Conference. The meeting took place by a lake and lasted just over an hour and a half. On the surface, it was bureaucratic, attended by well-educated men, 8 of whom even held doctorates. The subject, however, was chilling. They were there to coordinate Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question, the systematic extermination of Europe's Jewish population. The plan called for the deportation and eventual killing of up to 11 million people. Among those present was Adolf Eichmann. He was not the most senior figure in the room, but he was already deeply involved in the Nazi regime's policies against Jews. At Wannsee, he served as the meeting's organizer, took the minutes, and was tasked with overseeing the implementation of the final solution. It was here that his role as one of the key architects of the Holocaust was cemented. Eichmann's background did not suggest he would ever rise so high. He had dropped out of middle school and later failed to finish a mechanic's apprenticeship. He was by no means a brilliant academic or a gifted leader, but he was ambitious and determined to climb the Nazi hierarchy. He joined the SS in 1932 when the party was gaining power in Germany and quickly built a career within its ranks. By the late 1930s, he had been put in charge of the Central Office for Jewish Emigration, becoming the regime's expert in expelling Jews from public life in Germany and forcing them to leave the country. The Wannsee Conference marked a turning point. The vague idea of exclusion and deportation became the concrete policy of genocide. The language used in the minutes Eichmann drafted was deliberately coded. Jews would be evacuated to Eastern Europe. Those who survived initial labor would require suitable treatment. The meaning was clear: they would be killed. Eichmann was not a man who fought on the front lines, nor did he personally execute people. Instead, his power lay in organization. He was the bureaucrat of mass murder, ensuring that trains ran on time, that camps were supplied, and that gas chambers and crematoria could operate efficiently. As the war progressed, his role expanded. Each transport of Jews from across occupied Europe to death camps like Auschwitz or Treblinka required his office's authorization. When he sent telegrams ordering deportations, They often contained a phrase understood by all involved to be handled in accordance with instructions for special treatment. Special treatment meant one thing: murder in the gas chambers. Eichmann focused on efficiency. He introduced measures to streamline cremations so that bodies were reduced to ashes in less time. Conveyor belts were even installed to speed the removal of corpses from the ovens. Through his relentless paperwork, he enabled a system that killed 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, along with millions of others targeted by the regime. By 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Germany, the killing finally slowed and stopped. Hitler was dead, the Third Reich had collapsed, and survivors were left to piece together the devastation of their communities. For Eichmann, this was the end of the world he had built his career upon. But it was also the beginning of a long flight from justice. He knew he would be hunted. At first, he tried to blend in with other captured Germans. He put on the uniform of a low-ranking Air Force soldier and adopted the name Otto Barth. This deception worked for a time, but he was eventually detained by Allied forces. When they discovered the tattoo under his arm, marking him as a member of the SS, suspicion grew. He insisted he was a minor figure, nothing more than a clerk. With the post-war chaos and thousands of prisoners to manage, the Allies accepted his story. Rather than face a tribunal, he was sent to work in labor camps, sorting supplies and stacking ammunition. Conditions were not harsh, but Eichmann knew that the longer he stayed in custody, the more likely someone would uncover his real identity. He planned his escape carefully. With help from a sympathetic nurse, he obtained civilian clothes and one night slipped through the barbed wire of the camp. From there he vanished into the German countryside, adopting new names and finding odd jobs. At one point he worked as a lumberjack. At another he raised chickens. He moved often, never staying long enough for suspicion to build. He missed his wife and children, but reunion with them would have put him at risk of discovery. Instead he focused on survival. While Eichmann disappeared into obscurity, Europe was rebuilding. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted the most visible leaders of the Nazi regime, and many others were investigated. But the sheer scale of the crimes meant that thousands of perpetrators went unpunished. In that chaos, Eichmann slipped further away. His break came when he learned of escape routes being used by former Nazis, known as rat lines. These secret channels often relied on sympathetic members of the Catholic Church, who provided false documents and safe passage out of Europe. Argentina, which had been slow to declare war on Germany, became a key destination. Its government, under Juan Perón, quietly welcomed many fugitives from the defeated Reich. For Eichmann, Argentina seemed the perfect place to disappear permanently. By the late 1940s, he had made his way to Italy, and from there across the Atlantic to Buenos Aires. Using the alias Ricardo Clement, he settled into a modest life. He worked ordinary jobs, blended in with fellow immigrants, and eventually brought his family to join him. To the outside world, he appeared to be a simple factory worker and family man. But behind that disguise lay the man who had once organized one of history's greatest atrocities. As the storm clouds gathered over Buenos Aires years later, Eichmann had no idea that the very efficiency and attention to detail that once made him powerful would also make him traceable. Survivors, prosecutors, and intelligence agents had never stopped searching. For them, the war was not truly over until justice was done. After the collapse of Nazi Germany, Adolf Eichmann's escape from custody had given him a second chance at freedom. Under false names and moving between rural jobs, he avoided notice for several years. But survival in post-war Europe was not enough for him. He needed a more permanent solution, somewhere far from Allied investigators, somewhere the past could not so easily reach him. That solution came in the form of Argentina, a country on the other side of the world that had become a haven for many Nazi fugitives. Argentina had a complicated relationship with the war. It declared war on Germany only near the very end, and by that time, many of its leaders and networks were sympathetic to former Nazis. Juan Perón's government welcomed European immigrants, including war criminals, who were able to enter using forged documents. The so-called rat lines, escape routes that ran through Italy and Spain, enabled many of them to slip away under the cover of chaos. Eichmann became one of those men. By 1950, he arrived in Buenos Aires using the alias Ricardo Clement. In Argentina, he settled into an ordinary life. He worked first in small jobs, and eventually found employment at a Mercedes-Benz factory. His wife and children joined him, and the family lived in a modest house in the suburbs. To neighbors, he appeared like countless other German immigrants who had come to start fresh after the war. He was careful, rarely drawing attention to himself. Still, he occasionally let his guard down. His children attended school, and sometimes conversations hinted at who their father really was. Meanwhile, back in Germany, another story was unfolding. Fritz Bauer, a Jewish prosecutor, was steadily becoming one of the most determined figures in post-war justice. Bauer had suffered directly under the Nazis. As a young judge in the 1930s, he spoke out against the regime and was imprisoned in a concentration camp. After enduring interrogations and beatings, he was eventually released but banned from practicing law. He escaped Germany before the war's worst years, and only survived because he lived in exile. After the war, he returned to Germany, committed to helping rebuild a democratic legal system and to holding perpetrators accountable. Bauer's position was not an easy one. West Germany's justice system in the 1950s was still filled with former Nazis. Judges, prosecutors, and civil servants who had served during Hitler's rule now worked in positions of authority. Many had never been prosecuted, and they often shielded one another. This environment made Bauer an outsider in his own country. His insistence on facing the Nazi past head-on, rather than ignoring it, drew criticism and hostility. But Bauer was relentless. For him, it was not revenge he sought, but justice. In 1957, Bauer received a letter that would set in motion one of the most important manhunts in modern history. The letter was from a man in Argentina. He claimed that Adolf Eichmann was living there under the name Ricardo Clement. The writer explained that his daughter had been dating one of Eichmann's sons, who had boasted about his father's role in the Third Reich. The letter included an address in Buenos Aires. This was an extraordinary lead, but it also carried enormous risk. If Bauer tried to open an official case for extradition, word might spread. Eichmann could be tipped off and disappear again, especially since networks of ex-Nazis were known to exist both in Germany and in Argentina. Worse still, German authorities themselves could not always be trusted. Bauer suspected that many officials, still sympathetic to former Nazis, might leak information to protect Eichmann. So Bauer made a decision. He would keep the matter almost entirely secret. Instead of working through official German channels, he reached out to Israel. By this time, Israel was home to many Holocaust survivors, people whose lives had been directly shattered by the policies Eichmann had overseen. For them, capturing Eichmann would not just be a matter of justice, it would be a defining statement of their statehood, showing that the Jewish people could confront those who had tried to destroy them. Bauer proposed a deal. He would provide the intelligence, and Israel would handle the capture. The Israelis agreed, sending Mossad agents to Argentina to investigate. At first, the mission did not look promising. When the first agent went to the given address, he found a shabby house on a dirt road. It hardly looked like the home of a high-ranking Nazi official. He reported back with doubts, and Mossad began to question whether Bauer's lead was reliable. Adding to the uncertainty, 3 separate German officials later told Bauer that Eichmann was not in Argentina at all. They suggested he was hiding in the Middle East, perhaps in Kuwait. Each of these officials, however, had ties to the Nazi past, and Bauer quickly recognized this as an attempt to mislead him. He had long suspected that a network of old colleagues protected one another, and now he believed he was seeing it in action. To counter this, Bauer used misdirection. He publicly hinted that Eichmann might be in Kuwait, hoping it would make him feel safe in Argentina. Behind the scenes, Bauer kept pressing the Israelis not to abandon the Argentinian lead. In the late 1950s, Mossad resumed surveillance. Agents began monitoring the house, and the man who called himself Ricardo Clement. They learned that he worked at a Mercedes plant and took the same bus, line 203, home every evening. They also observed the ages of his children, which matched what they knew of Eichmann's family. The evidence grew stronger, but Mossad wanted certainty before acting. Photographs taken of the man did not perfectly match the images of Eichmann from the war years. More than 15 years had passed, and his appearance had changed. Still, there were telling signs. The couple living in the house celebrated what appeared to be their 25th wedding anniversary, a detail that lined up with Eichmann's marriage records. Gradually, piece by piece, Mossad concluded that Ricardo Clement was indeed Adolf Eichmann. The decision to capture him was not simple. Kidnapping a man from another sovereign nation carried enormous diplomatic risks. Argentina could protest, or even retaliate, if it became known that Israeli agents had conducted an operation on their soil. Israel itself was still a young state, fighting for recognition and legitimacy on the world stage. Yet the chance to bring Eichmann to trial was too significant to pass up. Eventually, Israel's prime minister authorized the mission, with strict instructions that it remain secret. Mossad assembled a team of 7 agents for the abduction. Many of them had lost family members in the Holocaust, and for them, the mission carried a deeply personal weight. They would be tasked not only with seizing Eichmann, but also with ensuring he was smuggled safely out of Argentina and brought to trial in Israel. They studied his routine carefully. Every evening, he left the factory and rode the bus home. The plan would be to intercept him on his walk from the bus stop to his house. The agents knew it would have to be fast, precise, and silent. Any mistake could alert him, or lead to interference from local authorities. By 1960, the operation was set in motion. The agents gathered intelligence, prepared vehicles, and rehearsed their moves. They wore gloves not only to maintain secrecy, but also because the idea of touching the man responsible for so much suffering was unbearable to them. Each night, they waited near the bus stop, rehearsing their cover as men fixing a broken car engine. On one evening in May, their long vigil paid off. A man stepped off bus 203, walking towards his home. The agents moved into position. In moments, they would find out if their years of preparation and Bauer's determination would finally bring Adolf Eichmann face to face with justice. The moment Adolf Eichmann stepped off the bus in Buenos Aires, his life took a drastic turn. Mossad agents, who had spent years preparing, swiftly overwhelmed him. Within seconds, Eichmann was subdued, blindfolded, and forced into a car. The entire operation took less than a minute. Eichmann, now a prisoner, tried to maintain his false identity, insisting he was Ricardo Clement. However, the Mossad agents had gathered ample intelligence from Fritz Bauer's files. They knew his height, his family background, and most importantly, the tattoo under his left arm marking him as an SS member. When the agents searched his body, they found only a scar where the tattoo had once been. This was enough to confirm his true identity. After the agents interrogated him, Eichmann continued to insist on his false identity, but the agents pressed on. When questioned about his SS number, Eichmann made a mistake, slipping up and providing the wrong number. The agents seized on this slip and knew they had their man. Eichmann had unknowingly confirmed his identity. The Mossad agents now knew they had Adolf Eichmann in their custody. However, the next challenge was how to get him out of Argentina. The political ramifications of kidnapping a foreign national were enormous. Argentina was unaware of the operation, and if they found out, it could lead to a diplomatic crisis. Despite these risks, Israel's government approved the mission, and the agents began planning Eichmann's transport to Israel. The plan was bold and complex. The Israeli government arranged for a special flight on El Elt, Israel's national airline, disguised as a diplomatic event. A team of agents would pose as members of the flight crew. Eichmann, sedated, would be disguised as a drunk crew member. Other agents would pretend to be drunk passengers. Once on board, Eichmann would be seated in a first-class window seat next to a doctor who would ensure he stayed unconscious during the flight. The agents hoped to pass through airport security unnoticed. As the plane left Argentina and entered international airspace, the agents made an announcement to the passengers. Eichmann was aboard, being flown to Israel to stand trial. The world would soon learn that after years of hiding, Eichmann was finally being held accountable for his role in the Holocaust. In Buenos Aires, Fritz Bauer awaited news. After years of work, the breakthrough had finally come. When he received confirmation that Eichmann was in Israeli custody, he was overwhelmed with emotion. The years of effort had paid off. A few days later, Israel's Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion announced Eichmann's capture. The trial was set to take place in Jerusalem. It would be one of the most significant events in Israel's history. Survivors of the Holocaust, many of whom had lost family members to Eichmann's actions, would follow the trial closely. The trial began in 1961, with Eichmann's defense centered on claiming he was just following orders. But the evidence against him was irrefutable. Documents, testimonies from survivors, and Eichmann's own records exposed his active role in the murder of millions. In the end, Eichmann was found guilty of many charges and sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging on the night of May 31, 1962. While his execution could never undo the horrors he helped orchestrate, it provided a sense of justice to the millions of victims and their families. Fritz Bauer continued his fight for justice until his death in 1960. His relentless pursuit of Eichmann's capture and trial helped ensure that one of history's greatest atrocities would never be forgotten.